Awesome. Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. Thank you for joining me. I don't know whether you'll admit this or not, but my first question to you, or just kind of opening statement, is like, how did you become such a force plate expert, whether you're going to call yourself that or not?
Oh, well, I mean, the story goes like this. One of my mentors was Charles Poliquin. I don't know if you know the name Charles Poliquin, but
No way.
Charles was my strength coach. I moved to Calgary as an athlete, and Charles was a huge influence in my life and career-wise and other, just in general. And Charles really sparked a thing in me that strength and conditioning was a science. People may not remember that Charles, his origins was traveling around the world as a strength coach for the Canadian Olympic team, working with athletes, but spending lots of time around people like Dietmar Schmidt-Bleicher, Per Tesch, other really notable strength scientists at the time in the 80s, and he would bring that back, and he would write very scientifically about strength and conditioning. And it's funny, as you get to know Charles always had like I would call them like his own scientific method. Like he would do like, let's say he was looking at the shoulder girdle, he would get reference points for external rotation, and let's say scapular, like kind of scapular function with different movements, and he would sort of create ratios. And he was always very interested in creating, like, as he called it, structural tolerance and structural balance. And so coming up under that, I was always very passionate about becoming more scientific. But the problem was I just kept butting up against a wall where every time I would try to implement testing in the real world, it just fell really short. And I actually gave up. Like I was, I'd done my master's. I was like using different technologies. I tried everything, and honestly, nothing really gave me any value. And to answer your question specifically, I was at a conference in '08 in Colorado Springs. A guy named Per Agard was presenting on how they had been using a force plate system to look at basically neuromechanics and stretch shortening cycle function in older adults. So he's basically in an aging study, and was describing like how a force plate allowed you to not just look at how high somebody had jumped, which is where I had spent the most of my time as a strength coach. Like I would look at like jump performance, like jump height or something. And I just, and then he started to dissect how you could understand stretch shortening cycle mechanics by looking at the force signature, and in the context of aging, that's pretty important. And geez, I was like, holy cow, this is great. Like this is exactly what I think I need to start going down and exploring. And when I came back to Calgary after that conference, I had been very lucky to find these, like, force plates at the time were still like, well, they're still expensive, but like
Mm.
they were stupid expensive. They were like, you know, 20 grand, and you needed to know what to do with it. And I didn't, I didn't have that. That was not my budget. Like, so, working as a strength coach with the Canadian Olympic team, I stumbled on this company called Pasco, which makes these force plates that are about like they're about like a foot, or like maybe like a foot and a half by a foot and a half. Like they're small tiles, and they were the good thing is $600. And I was like, oh shoot, I could totally use this. Yeah, done. And so, but the problem was they were so small that I was like, shit, I'm going to need two, because I won't be able to have anybody like doing squats or cleans or anything on like a little tile. There's not enough room. Like you wouldn't be able to do it if you're a big guy, right? So I was like, well, I can buy two of those because they're $500. So I bought two force plates, brought them back out to Calgary, and we started testing and using them. And I had so many athletes at the time that were rehabbing, and then all of a sudden, I was starting to like get them to squat on the plates, clean on the plates, jump on the plates, loaded jumps on the plates. And I started to see that, just like in Per's presentation, like the force time curves were extremely, I'm saying this in scare quotes in case your audience is not seeing me. Like I've got I'm going to say it was extremely diagnostic. And I'm not talking about diagnostic like disease. I'm saying strength diagnostic, because I was like, oh, holy, now I can see how they create unloading patterns, how they create braking forces, how they create propulsion, how they land. And I had two plates so I could naturally measure one limb to the other limb. And honestly, all I got to say is it was super organic. I was just experimenting, using it in the gym, and using them more and more and more. And that led me to a PhD in medical science. And Per was on my committee, and my PhD was to address the problem of our ski racers who blow their knees up all the time. It's a very serious injury for ski racers, and they suffer very catastrophic knee injuries. We had no real good lens on their function, return to play, return to performance. And I thought, you know what, maybe this dual force plate system can actually provide us some insight. And I started to deploy this technology more and more in an ACL injured population and an athletic population. And that was basically the birth of, my knowledge in the area, and obviously my passion for developing a better sense of like how injury impacts neuromechanics and stretch earning cycle function. So yeah.
So that that was '08, and now we're looking at almost like 17 years later. What
Yeah.
has been like? Talk to me through that 17-year journey then.
Yeah, well, I mean, I went back, get a little personal here. I think sometimes people's journey helps to understand like why they are where they are. But, in '08, I was a new dad. I just had a baby, and sadly my wife at the time and I were not doing well. And that was a very tumultuous time where we ended up getting divorced, and it was a hard time in my life. And I was looking at my career trajectory, and realizing that as a strength coach with the Canadian Olympic team and having to travel a lot, that it was like,
Get CEUs faster, cheaper, and more convenient than ever before with Strength Coach Network. Hey, it's Justin, here to tell you about how Strength Coach Network can now help you out with our premium membership and CEUs to the NSCA and CSCCA. Upon signing up for our premium membership, you will get 2.0 or 10 CEUs immediately. That is an entire year's worth of CEUs that you are able to access from the convenience of your office. No traveling for conferences, no waiting on flights, no eating out, no expensive hotels. Just the good stuff from great coaches. Now, if you need extra CEUs for past years during the reporting period, we can bundle Fundamentals 1 or 2, which also come with 2.0 or 10 CEUs to your purchase. That way, you're able to take care of your CEUs for the best price, most convenient, and learn from some of the best coaches. If you want more help with this, email us at service@strengthcoachnetwork or visit us at strengthcoachnetwork.com, and I would be delighted to help you out.
I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make this work. And so I thought to myself, do I quit and go to med school? And at this point, I'm like in my mid 30s, right? So I was like, do I quit and go to med school? Do I change careers altogether, or what do I do? And I thought, maybe the best thing for me is to keep pushing with the science, because I love that. And I said I want to do a PhD, and I think that's the best fit for me. And so really at the end of the day, I went back, and it was a grind in that period of time, was where I was trying to get my wings level as a dad, and get my house sorted out, and my life and my relationship with my ex, which to this day is still really, really good. We're co-parents, and we have a really good relationship between our families. But long story short is, this whole trajectory of sort of being in the gym and trying to become more scientific and looking for clues and using new technologies, it led me to a natural progression towards the PhD, which I did. And after completing my PhD, I became a little bit more centered on, I would say, more sport leadership. I was a director of sports science, sport medicine for our alpine ski racing team for a period. I worked at one of our Olympic training centers here in Calgary for several years, and at the time was working as a consultant and with teams. So I was in this space of kind of leading other teams, and doing work with athletes and rehabs and applying the science so I was able to do the research, but I was also very interested in like the living lab. So athlete would get injured, and they would come to our lab, and we would like bring all the experts together in a team around the athlete, and use the data as like an anchor point to help do better rehabs, essentially. And so that was it was a great time. I was loving it. And during COVID, I had a really dear friend of mine, a guy named Louis Passfield, who some of your colleague or your listeners may know. He was a very prominent exercise physiologist. Louis had moved to Calgary, and he's an exercise physiologist, very, very accomplished. He and I shared an office, beautiful human. And he said, "Hey, listen, Matt, I've met the love of my life. I've relocated to Calgary. I was a professor in the United Kingdom, and a position had come up at the university. And he said, "Hey, do you want to share this position with me? Because if we could share this position, it would be perfect. Like you teach a course, I teach a course, and maybe we have complementary research programs." And I kind of said, "Louis, if it helps you, I'll gladly put my name in the hat to kind of help share this role." And I wasn't looking for it at the time, but my name got dropped in the hat for another position that had opened up in the university as well. And long story short, is they came back and said, "Hey, the hire for this one job is not going to happen with Louis, but this other one opened up in the sport medicine center, and they were like, listen, we'd like to offer it to you." And I took a bit of leap of faith, and I said, I've been working in Olympic sport for so long, and it was time to freshen things up. And I took the job, and so I transferred over to becoming an academic as I am now with a research lab and PhD students and master students, and so a big career change in some ways. In other ways, it was very familiar to me. I've been doing a lot of that work, and yeah, that's kind of the trajectory. So it was like 17 years of like working with athletes, living lab, applying the science. And now I sort of see my role as, what I love is, to be honest with you, is just giving back to my people in my group who are aspiring to have had aspiring to what I was able to achieve because of people like Charles, and so I now see myself in a position of like, hey, like, my days of gallivanting around the world are probably done as a strength coach, but hey, here's your opportunity. And now I get to help those new up and coming strength and conditioning coaches hopefully achieve their dreams, and mentor where I can, and give them an outlet to be able to do research and get their masters or one PhD or whatever, and watch them now go out and do their great work with all their athletes as this world evolves that we all live in. So it's kind of my day to day now.
Appreciate you sharing that story and being vulnerable. That's I commend you for that. I just want to speak to that for you, sharing that story. And anybody listening to that, understand we all have our stories, we all have our scars that continue to push us forward. The thing that I want to kind of double click on, for lack of a better term, is what you talked about with the better rehab and how to best serve athletes. And you talked about ACL, and that made me think about Carmen Bott, who I'm going through her ACL course right now. We can start and talk about ACL because that was kind of the genesis of yours, but like, talk about how force plates can help you in the rehab setting, how we then ultimately serve athletes, and let's just kind of explore that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the main thing is that everybody knows that only one dimension of what we care about is the output. Like the output being how high did you jump, how fast did you run, how much did you lift. And we all understand that what we probably care about equally, maybe even more, is how did the athlete generate that movement?
What's up, everybody? Taking a quick break from the show to talk about one of our sponsors, Team Builder. I've been using Team Builder since 2019 when I was at Towson. I still use it with my remote athletes. I also use it at Goldfinch, which is the private sector gym I train at, and we use it at Centennial, which is the high school that I'm working at. Now, if you're printing on lift cards because you say, oh, I can't afford Team Builder, guess what? Team Builder has a pre-written grant that you can locate on their website. You simply change the name of you, your organization, and the areas that they highlighted, and they can help you get Team Builder at your facility, your university, whatever it is, so that way you can optimize how you train your athletes with this software. Now, Team Builder is also a part owner in the Plyomat. The Plyomat is something that I utilize at Goldfinch, and it helps you be able to see how high somebody jumped, the ground contact time, and RSI. You can get all that conveniently right there. You can reach out to your rep from Team Builder to be able to get more information on the plyomat. It's fast, it's reliable, it's convenient, and it's trusted by coaches worldwide. Check them out as well as Team Builder in the link down below.
And that leads us to things like, trying to use video and trying to understand kinematics, and like to be able to look at like positions and postures and sort of try to infer like what the forces would be. And I think that's where a lot of coaches spend their time, is they're watching, which is amazing. And then they're connecting what they see with what the output is. And what I find, what's really valuable about a force plate is, the forces are the things that make us move, and the forces are the things that make us output whatever it is we output. So you take a lens on how that athlete applies force into the ground in these standardized movements. And I see vertical jumping, if you're in sport like volleyball, it is your performance indicator. But for the rest of us, it is a stretch shortening cycle movement. And there are many variations of it, from really fast ones like a drop jump or a repeat hop, all the way down to a really, non stretch shortening cycle movement like a squat jump, and shades of gray in between. And by using those plates and applying extra loads to maybe do loaded jump testing, or modifying this contraction time, or those things, like we're able to understand how athletes couple these eccentric and concentric movements together to generate these actions. And so really at the end of the day, for ACL injury, what we know is that ACL injured athletes will be able to compensate. And you compensate by becoming more hip dominant, using your ankle more, by changing your mechanics, how you apply force to achieve the same performance, while masking where you're missing. And so if you're only looking at performance, like we used to do for a decade, where it would be like, hey, your goal for return to sport is you got to squat, I'm just making stuff up, by the way, 1.5 times your body weight. You got to hit, 300 watts on a incremental maximal aerobic power bike test or whatever. Like, you have some random thresholds that you hit. What now shifts is, you need to see below that to ask how they're doing it. And so the force plate allows you to see the kinetics in a way that unveils where they're missing. And because that's a very sensitive tool, and it's a very accurate tool, especially if your force plates are working properly, you can really see things. All it allows us to do is to dissect the components of the movements and to understand how they're applying forces. And it can unveil where they're missing capacity. And so I like it because it's objective. I like it because I can see not only sort of the propulsive side, but I'm more and more of my research program is around eccentric deceleration and eccentric strength. So, you can see that in a force plate, tracing of a vertical jump. And ultimately, it is a really, like, once you got the equipment, thereafter, it's an extremely easy test to use. And, I'll just give you one story, Justin, that I was really inspired by when I was in the middle of, like I say, just prior to my PhD. I was watching this documentary about climate change, and they had some scientists on there who said that, to unravel the complexity of climate change, in one part of this longitudinal study, they were trying to understand how much sunlight was hitting the earth. And they went back to this like really simple thing that farmers have been recording for, a century, which is called pan evaporation. But they put out a pan of water. They look at how much water evaporates on a 24-hour basis. And it's just a reflection of sunlight hitting the earth, indirect, right? So it's a proxy for, like, the more sunlight, the more it evaporates, and so on. And because people record this systematically in a journal, the most simple thing, you need a pan, water, consistency, jot it down. Now you've got this longitudinal data set, which when stuff starts to go squirrely, let's say with the climate, you're like, why is this happening? You can go back to this like really standard measure that you've taken day over day over day for a long period of time. And it really speaks to the importance of your test being feasible and applicable, and like simple things matter. And honestly, like the only cost now is buying these force plates, and the software is automated, but it's the most simple test you can do. You know, it takes 5 minutes. We can run through a squad of athletes in half an hour at the most. And if you do it every single Monday after a rest day, and you run through your stretch shortening cycle movements, and you do that consistently over time, now you've got this lens on how people recover after, let's say, an ACL injury. You've got a lens on fatigability. You've got a lens on performance data points. Like all of these things start to become much more visible, and it's just a very useful tool in those contexts. So, you know, it's objective, it's standardized. You can see more than just how high you jumped. You get the forces, easy to implement. And so I think it's a really valuable tool for anybody working in sport performance or injury.
Have you worried too much on, or I say the word worry because I overly paranoia about trying to find the best program and the best whatever and the best methodology in terms of how long is too long, too short for athletes to rest when doing any of this testing?
Like to rest, like in the day leading in or the day of?
Sorry, like within, if you're going to do a couple of different trials on the force plate, if you're going to have them do
Yeah.
a couple different jumps.
Yeah, it's pretty important. I mean, I think what I've learned over the years is that if you want to be able to see the signal through the noise, you gotta get extremely disciplined with how you collect data. And your data collection process needs to be extremely routine and disciplined. And that means that you do need to take careful control over how much rest people have between jumps, how you standardize between tests on the same day, your anchor point in the week when you do your tests. All of those things really, really matter, because what you're trying to do now is you're trying to tighten up your measurement error so that when you see a small biological signal coming, like something's changed in the system, you want to be able to detect that, and you want to be able to have confidence that what you're seeing is real.
What's up, everybody? Taking a quick break from the show to talk about one of our sponsors, Hawken Dynamic. I've been using Hawken Dynamics ever since I was at Towson. Still utilize it today when I'm at the private sector at Goldfinch. Even brought the plates from Goldfinch over to Centennial to do some force plate testing with the football team there. We've done force plate testing with other high school athletes. It is something that you need to get. If you want more help with it about how to practically use it and you want to reach out to us, feel free to reach out to us at service@strengthcoachnetwork.com. Not only do I utilize it with lower body assessments, I use it with upper body assessments, plyo push-ups, prone Y assessments. You can also utilize it for what I call an upper body isometric mid thigh pull, where essentially you're doing a push up at the strongest range and you're pushing into an immovable force, so a barbell, same way you do an isometric mid thigh pull. Like I said, been using them from years, valid, reliable. The customer service is fantastic. Go check out Hawken Dynamic in the link down below, and you will not be disappointed.
And so I think maybe the question is, do I worry about it? Oh my God, do I ever worry about it? That's exactly what I do. I stress about it because when you're in the driver's seat, and you're making recordings and you're doing this, you become very disciplined, and then as you start to grow a lab, let's say, or you start to grow a department, you now rely on the how conscientious and careful everybody else is around you. And so one of the things that I absolutely try my best to really drill home with my lab and my PhD and my master's students is never trust anything ever, ever. Any data point, don't trust it. Be skeptical. Question it. Make sure your measures were right. Make sure your protocols were right. Make sure your force plate was working. Make sure nobody messed around with the wires. Make sure, like, you are aiming to be extremely disciplined, and part of that discipline is I will go in exactly like you said, and I will we work really hard on creating protocols that are standardized so that we can control for things like fatigability, potentiation, effort, all of these things, which will definitely create variability in your measures, which could obscure something, or it could unveil something that's not what you want to see, because it's a red herring, right? So I think it's a really crucial detail. Like I've learned that the hard way. I've learned that through good mentorship. I've learned that through trial and error. But I do know now that it's a value for me that that is indispensable. And anytime I teach clinicians about this, or I teach, I go drop into I do a lot of online consulting with my website where, maybe people want to start deploying these technologies and they want to understand how to use them. A massive component of that is I teach them the basics of measurement error and reliability, validity, and just the basics of, like, honestly, data hygiene. How do you get good data? So it's a crucial consideration. Yeah.
How about any of our listeners that are like, okay, I hear you, Matt, but I now work with a group of athletes and we're going to do this intra lift and we're going to do some jumping and it's going to be on the Monday and we're going to do it with in the middle of our lift. Some weeks, for 4 weeks, it's going to be with a back squat paired with it, or before, and then it's a front squat or it's a rear foot elevated for 4 weeks. Like, how does that make the data stay clean? And then also, any of our listeners out there that maybe work in basketball, soccer, lacrosse, where there's game day plus -1 all in the same week. How do you handle that?
Yeah. Tags.
Oh.
You need to tag your data. And you know why? Like, this is the thing that we have to realize is we're in an era right now where you can't see like, when you're collecting data, you can't see the value you don't know where it's going to take you. Like, I'm going to go back to my journey in 2008. When I got these 2 force plates and I started testing, the first day I collected data, it was all for naught. It would suck, right? It was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And the next day, but now, after doing this for 15 years, like, your data sets become extremely valuable. And so what I would encourage your listeners to do is that you want to create metadata in your test that says, counter movement jump, body mass was 82 kilos, post front squat, effort level 10, injury status uninjured, like sport, basketball, sex, male, all that stuff, right? So you want to have all that metadata. And the reason you want to have that metadata is when you go back to analyze, you may want to say, geez, now that I've got all these data points, I wonder if this, like, in science, we often talk about, aggregation of studies to understand the average response in a group of humans. Like, that's like, so we think about meta-analysis. It's like, does creatine work? And we go and analyze 30 studies, and it's like, yes, on average, creatine offers a really good effect on X, Y, and Z. Some people are hyper responders. Some people don't respond. What do you and I care about? I want to know the single person over time, N equal 1. Who are the outliers? Like, who is this awesome for? And who does this not work for? Because at the end of the day, our hierarchy of evidence in sport is the single person over time, where you fine tune stuff and you get things as dialed as you can. So imagine that you've been recording for an entire summer front squats versus back squats, and you record jumps after. I might be interested in understanding, I wonder if there's an effect there for this person that maybe contributes to more or less potentiation of leg power output, depending upon if they use a front squat or a back squat. Because, maybe what I'll do now that we're in season is, instead of just me guessing whether I should use a front squat or a back squat, maybe I'll make a guess and then I'll go look and see if the data confirms that maybe there is an effect there, or maybe I do it and I'm like, holy shit, I never would have noticed this, but wow, like, when they do this movement, it's like, it's a clear difference. Like, sometimes you stumble on those nuggets, and honestly, like, it's so valuable retrospectively at the level of N equal 1. But if your listeners can just do one thing, it's data hygiene and create context for your data. So we now at baseline, like, we've been doing this longitudinal study with our university athletes, and we've got 500 athletes now that we test every single year, and very expansive testing, baseline testing, strength testing, battery. But we are also asking these individuals, we do use a questionnaire called the Sport Fitness Index, which gives us an index of their, what we call perceived limb function. It kind of like teases out whether you got the niggle, like a hamstring, or like an incomplete rehabilitation, like you're uninjured. But it's like, man, my knee is, like, I'll give you my example. Like, I had one of my honors students he's a swimmer, and we were looking at the ASH test.
Okay.
it's like the Ash test is that force plate test. And,
Yep.
I was a subject just to try it out. And I've got this like bulge disc in my left, like C5. And I've got just my shoulder, everything's jacked on this side. Like it's always some state of kind of shitty, it's not, it's always a little, but I wouldn't say I'm injured, right? Like if you ask me, I'm like, I'm not injured, but I know it's not great. When I fill out this sport fitness index, it gauges that, and I will score low.
What's up, y'all? Taking a quick break from the show to talk to you about another one of our sponsors, Vitruve. I've been utilizing Vitruve for a while now, and I absolutely love the convenience of this app. The encoder is at a price that you cannot beat compared to the competitors. Also, I don't personally like the camera apps. I've known that they continue to break down, and I really enjoy having this encoder attached directly to the bar. Vitruve does that. Not only does it do that, but it'll show me velocity loss during the set, shows me average velocity, all of it right within the app. Not only that, for the app on the individual athlete, there's a Vitruve Teams app where now, as the coach, I can see all the results from my athletes. I can API that into my team builder, and now everything that I'm trying to do, get better competition, better intent in the weight room, I am able to do with Vitruve. If you want more information about them, click the link down below, or you can ask us questions directly at service@strengthcoachnetwork.com, and we would love to answer those questions for you.
On my perceived limb function. But why that's so important is that when I do my strength test, upper body, using a force plate, I'm 50% different side to side on shoulder flexion strength. Isometrically, this side is 50% weaker. And so you can imagine, like, if you're trying to study context, like you need to know that I am a person who's got some stuff, because don't treat me like a really good example of what I should. I'm not injured, but I'm not good. And so in the same way with our longitudinal study, is we ask that questionnaire, which gives us a sense of like perceived limb function. We ask a bunch of questions around attitudes towards training. So like things like, do you think strength training is good? Like, do you think strength training helps you prevent injuries? Would you prefer to lift with body weight or heavy weight? Like we try to create context to understand athletes who are like, I don't like the gym. And, I know it sounds insane, but like, let's face it, if you're working with a basketball team,
like it's true.
like how many of them are like, I hate the gym. And maybe you want to know now, like, I'm trying to understand whether or not, let's say, some sort of like benchmark is like, where should they sit? And you're like, well, I don't know where they should sit. And then you go back and you look at the data, you're like, wow, man, our best player though is like the worst. And you're like, why is the best player the worst? And it's like, I don't know. Honestly, I just think he hates the gym. And you wrestle with this stuff, right? But like, those are the sorts of contextual pieces that we record that. So we have questions and we have ratings, and now I can go back and be like, let's see if strength expression has different characteristics in terms of their attitudes around training that we may not see. Another really good example that we're super interested in, Justin, in this case as well for your listeners, is and I'll be pretty intentional about my words here, but like, I work with women athletes, and even though I know that lots of strength coaches, it's improved for sure. Like the landscape for women in sport, I know it's trying to become up, right, where they get access to the resources, they get access to good strength and conditioning, they get good training, all this stuff. But there are still environments where, for girls and women who lift, it's a different. Whereas maybe for boys and men, it's like, I want to get jacked is kind of like an outcome. And it's like, it pulls you in more on average. I'm not saying generalization. I'm saying on average, it's like, I wanted that. When I was 17, I wanted to lift. For girls and women, that's not necessarily like, lifting could be like, I don't want to look jacked. But you're trying as a strength coach to be like, I want to confer benefit, not to make you jacked, but because if we train you well, it could reduce your risk of a knee injury, right? And so you can't disentangle the training environment from the context. And so but if I want to understand who's at risk, I need to understand the context that they're in and how they express their strength. And so I guess what I'm saying is a super roundabout way of questioning, asking like, what does your listener do if they've got a squad of athletes, and you're trying to like make sense of your data? Get as much context as you can. I'm trying to express the granularity that we aim to go into so that we can make sense retrospectively of what the data means. But I think that's a really important aspect, especially for using your data down the road, where now you're going to try to inform some decisions, and you're not going to be sitting there after 10 years with this awesome data set where you're like, geez, this was our best player, but they were the weakest and they got hurt all the time. Like, what does that mean? If you have the context, you may be able to see a pattern, which was like, oh, they hated the gym. They look like these other athletes that hate the gym. This is what athletes who hate the gym look like, and this is how they change. If we can nudge them this way, their attitudes improve around it, their strength gets better, and they don't get hurt. If we don't affect that, they stay crappy, and they they don't train well, and they don't like it, and they have bad outcomes. But if you could understand that, you may be able to say, now moving beyond just the strength test, you're like, it's strength and attitudes, and we need to start by shifting their attitude about this in order to shift their strength. It's like, that's the sort of game I think that maybe for your listeners that we need to play a little more. And if you can build context, your data sets can become super informative. So
what's been your strategy to help shift that? Because speaking life into what you said, yes, let's call it what it is. Like, a group of meatheads is typically not going to be your female whatever team, generally speaking. But generally speaking, I have found that women's hockey will train way harder than men's hockey from my experience. So it's like there's always a caveat with it. My question that I teed up there to you is, how do you then recommend to the listeners out there to read the room, figure it out, and then try to shift it and help those athletes understand, hey, we're here to help you and what we can do to help?
I think if what you just said, if I could paraphrase with what you just said, is there is as much variability within as there is between men's and women's teams. So you can't generalize and say, this is how men are, this is how women are. You need to approach each room with your own authentic self in that sort of appraisal of like, what am I dealing with? But the point that I think you raised is if you're aware of it and you're like, I'm not just coaching a spreadsheet here. I'm not just coaching X's and O's and 1RMs, and like, there's more to it than that. Then all of a sudden you start to see, and as you become more experienced as a coach, you start to realize that the greatest coaches are the ones who can shift attitudes, and they can like subtly create buy-in. And that's maybe one danger about our world that's become a little bit more analytical in some places, is we forget that it's a human relationship first. And I guess what I'm saying is, how do we account for that? Is you have to walk in, number one, knowing that you can't say there's a women and a men profile. You may walk into rooms and have a sense of like, what's the culture for this team and this individual? And you may come in with an expectation of being able to influence attitudes as much as you are training, and that those two things are super crucial to do together. And if you are trying to make sense of your data, having some grasp of the fact that like your environment is shaping expression of strength, then now you can maybe have context. But I'm very much like, I'm very careful now to not make those generalizations, because I agree with you. I'm not going to give away anything here, but we've done some analyses about this stuff using machine learning. I've got a guy named Zach McLean, who's a PhD student who is nearly wrapped up his degree. And Zach is, by the way, like, he's an example of like athletic therapist, strength and conditioning coach, sports scientist, codes in Python, codes in R, does like, he's just like I'm like, oh my God, when I was at his stage, I was still just trying to figure out how to like, I was nowhere near that. It's amazing how much someone like him has changed, right? Or evolved the game. but he's got some really interesting data. And can I tell you something that's so amazing? The men's side is like staggering when you look at their attitudes and how the attitudes influence strength. Where we might be like, oh, they're all a bunch of meatheads, right? No, they're not actually. In a group of football players, let's say, there are distinct differences attitudes wise that when you see it, you're like, I never would have thought that. And I don't want to give anything away because Zach's busy analyzing, and I don't want to get ahead of myself and announce something that's not real. So I'll let him do his work, and maybe your listeners can keep an eye out for Zach's work when it hopefully gets published. But I honestly, early data, I'm looking at it, I'm like, geez.
Taking a quick break from the show to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Powerlift. I used Powerlift when I was at Harvard, Maryland, and the University of Iowa. I was also part of the staff that had the new weight room at the University of Iowa, the 32-rack, beautiful facility. I was a part of that. I also have Powerlift's equipment nowadays. Powerlift Strong, made here in the great state of Iowa in the great country of the United States. They're able to work with you on any customizations that you need, logos, height, whatever it is, the limitations that you have. Their equipment is strong. The people there, they're very good people. Check them out in the link down below. And if you have any questions on how to work with them, reach out to us at service@strengthcoachnetwork.com, and we would be delighted to help.
I never would have thought that. It's like there's a different in your meatheads. They're not all just meatheads, actually. And I'm saying that friendly. I'm being scare quotes again for your listeners. I'm not, but it's like, geez, there's subtle differences. Actually, I'm not saying subtle. Sorry, statistically significant differences. It seems like in how they appraise things. And I guess at the end of the day, that's just a really interesting observation for me. That you raise it very well. Like, you just got to be aware of it as a coach, and you got to meet people where they're at and treat people like individuals, and try to avoid bringing in your biases, with one of the biggest ones being there's a men's and a women's way. There's variability. There might be stuff on average that you can say, but if there's one thing that I think is true, it's your experience that the women's hockey team trains harder than the men's hockey team. Depending upon your culture, with your coach, with that history, with those captains, that will drive culture around the gym, and we need to know that.
How do you feel that the scientific process is or is not being properly used in strength and conditioning anymore? Do you feel like people are just doing things to do things rather than be like, hey, we have a problem, let's hypothesize and investigate it and figure things out?
Yeah, I mean, that to me has been always where, in an ideal state, I think that the critical thinking around training is, I call it the training hypothesis. But when you're mastering your craft, that's kind of the stage you're at. It's like you're sitting down on Sunday to program, and you are looking at where they've been, you're looking at where they need to head, and you are coming up with what you think is the biggest rate limiter or the most important focus, and you're designing the perfect program to change and shift that person's trajectory. And depending upon whether you work in something like Olympic sport that's cyclical and it's all literally about output, like the more horsepower you put out, the faster you go, or you're working with professional basketball where these are super talents, and it's not about the X's and O's of power output that's going to shift the game. And for them, it's staying healthy, it's staying available, it's minimizing, it's getting in early to adjust something that could be adjusted to help keep them in the game and performing at a better level. I think at the end of the day, what's maybe missing is that how your data links to how your programming decision, and that to me is like how about the way I put it like this, Justin? So Sherlock Holmes, when Sherlock Holmes comes to a scene of an accident or a murder, Sherlock Holmes doesn't go to the scientific textbooks to look at the theory on why murders happen. So he's not using deductive reasoning. He's using a different form of reasoning. He's using inductive reasoning. So what he's doing is he's taking his magnifying glass, his fingerprint kit, his DNA kit, and he's going to the scene of the crime, and he's going to take data points and measurements, right? And he's going to talk to witnesses, and he's going to arrive at a theory as to who killed the butcher. And then he's gathering evidence to sort of to build that theory of who killed the butcher. And that's inductive reasoning. And that's how we operate. You're looking for clues. That's what you do every time you watch an athlete. You're watching, you're understanding, you're trying to get nuance. Good coaches are picking up on the environment. Everything's coming together. And then the next step would be maybe you're bringing in some force plates or something else that's going to allow you to get more objective. But at the end of the day, imagine your reasoning process is you're trying to figure out the clues, stitch them together to be like, my theory is that this person needs left side eccentric deceleration capacity, and what's limiting them is a hip internal rotation. And so I want to up the internal rotation. I want to change this component, that component. I want to create a better cohesiveness with their, I'm just, whatever however you do your training. And then you're going to monitor to see like, yeah, there we go. We moved the needle on that. And to me, that's sort of the inductive reasoning of coaching, where you're trying to become as much as you can surgical and specific about pulling the levers on the right stuff, versus what a lot of coaches tend to do, which is like when you start off, you're like, well, I think I need to be doing some hip internal rotation. I think I need to be doing some shoulder, I saw that thing on the reflexive eccentrics on Sportsmith that Stu McMillan did. I guess I better throw that in, and I got to throw this in and that in, and the next thing you know, you've got this program that's like, we just did it all, right? And it was never really calculated. And I'll say one more thing, Justin, that's really crucial. I ask every experienced coach, if you had one fail-safe experiment, what would it be? And 99% of the time, these coaches who are like, 50 years down the road, they'll say something like, I would love to go back and see how much I could have stripped away. And would I have still gotten the result? Like how much could I have taken out and still achieve the result that we did? Because I wonder if I needed all that stuff, or if I could have just stripped it down to a few things for this person. And that idea that like, as you become more experienced as a coach, you start to minimize and get more specific. You cut out the noise. You're down to like the stuff that really matters. I think that's the idea of science that coaches need to embrace. Is you're like Sherlock Holmes, use inductive reasoning, gather clues, stay aware, right? And arrive at what you think the best idea is for the next step, and test to see if it makes it better, and do that systematically over time. And that to me is like that simplified art of coaching, where it's like targeted, simple, do the stuff that matters, measure the stuff that matters, change the stuff that matters, really distinct difference in senior, like experienced coaches who often end up there just because that's where we see them end up, because they know that that's what works.
That makes a lot of sense. And within that world of, the scientific method, and getting back to what you said with Charles, I saw something the other day where it said, like exercise is not science. It's not chemistry. It's not it's not always going to be like if this, then that. And therefore it's not exercise science. Like exercise science is the wrong word. Based off of everything that we've talked about, for the last 45 minutes, how would you respond to somebody that was saying that?
Well, I mean, how would I respond? I would say that the application of science in the daily training environment of an athlete is not the application of pure exercise science, and it's not the same process. And I would tend to agree that when you're working in sport, you are Sherlock Holmes using scientific tools, maybe, and you are engaging in a process that resembles aspects of science, but you are very interested in a single person over time, and you're understanding that not everything that counts can be measured, and not everything that you can measure counts. And you are using that discerning judgment of experience and data and everything together to create the best environments that you can. Now, on the other hand, as a scientist, we still are trying to generate compelling evidence that tries to represent what the truth of the world. And I think on that other side, it's like, the scientific process, in my estimation, is the best way for us to approach trying to arrive at a general truth about how we think the world works. And so generating scientific evidence and the idea of science in that case is like, it's a different world. And so all I'll say is one of my hardest things I've ever had in my career to do is to navigate how I speak to a room full of coaches about applying science, and then shifting my brain to talk to a room of researchers about how how science in an applied world is still like it still follows the rules of science. It's like you have a real big difference in the audience. And so, living in both worlds, all I know to be true is that these individuals you're having a conversation with, I would say they're probably not wrong. It's like, yeah, we use science differently in that world, applied world, as compared to how a scientist use science to be able to understand the truth of the world. That's just, and I sit in the middle there and I dance between both worlds, which is, I think, a really interesting place to live. But it's not easy. I say it's the messy
kind of
world.
Majoring in the minors though, because it's like, okay, this is what we're using to measure and better understand exercise. Like, isn't it potato versus potato?
It is, but it's more. It is, but it's also fundamentally like a different. It's like a different currency. It's like trading in Bitcoin versus, like, I don't know, stocks or something. It's like, yeah, the goal's kind of the same, but the mechanics of it all, the world of Bitcoin versus stock exchanges, like, couldn't be more different. But it's kind of the same. Like, in some ways, you kind of do similar things, but it's like the culture of a Bitcoin crypto person versus like, man, I've got friends who live in those worlds. And when I talk to my crypto friends, they're like, dude, come sell your house, take your money, come over here. And then, on the other hand, it's like you have a different kind of like world, right? It's so, I think in some ways, it is different, but it's also, the end goal is different. And I summarize the end goal by being like, my highest level of scientific evidence in my applied world is the data I collect on a single person over time in patterns. I want to know your pattern, which is going to be unique to you. And I want to try to understand that pattern so I can make a better decision to help you go out and perform at your best. On the other side, when we're trying to understand science in the research world, I'm trying to generate. I'm trying to like generate or limit my uncertainty about observations and my uncertainty about the world by studying in a very specific and systematic way, so I can understand whether there's effects of interest in a sense of more of a truth. Like, on average, is creatine something we should recommend? And it's like, yes, like, the studies have been done in a randomized, controlled way, and we have evidence that says, you know what, creatine confers benefits. It's like, but to do that was like, researchers had to go through the process of, experimental design and randomization and sampling and like creating, controls and being able to study effects, and like, it was like a different pathway. And that's why I think sometimes the science catches up to what we do in the applied sense. Like, they already knew creatine worked before the studies came out. That was I remember the first time I met Charles in like the 90s. He's like, creatine, it's the new supplement. I'm like, oh, well, let's take it. Like, where do you get it? Well, down at the store here. Like, so, there was no, like, it was like, I could see it works. Okay, great. Now, 30 years later, it's like the body of evidence says creatine is favorable. Okay, great. Well, that the science caught up with a practice. Um, and so it's almost like maybe that's where your potato is. It's like maybe one's sort of like trying to understand individual responses and finding really good things. Like the ancient samurai sword builders weren't PhDs in chemistry. You know, ancient samurai sword builders were masters of an art, and they built the perfect weapon. They're not they're not PhDs in organic chemistry. They're practiced. And science maybe comes along and is like, why was that such a great weapon? Let's study the microstructure of swords. Like, oh wow, look at this. We can explain why this combination of metals and heating made the perfect weapon. But it's like the science, like that's sort of how I see that world of coaching and application and scientific method. On the other hand, right? It's just they're complementary, but they're potato. They got different goals. Hopefully they dance together and they don't hate each other. But it's you got to know when to use what. That's my view, at least. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. That helps me clear it up. Last question, to respect your time. One of the things that you talked about was having the opportunity to kind of gallivant the world and see and travel and do things. What would be kind of your echoing message to strength coaches out there to actually go and do the thing, or researchers? Because I feel like there may be this failure to launch and not want to go and travel and explore. I've talked ad nauseum about the need for coaches to do this. I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
It was something early on that my peer group of strength and conditioning coaches committed to, which was on a yearly basis, we would take a pilgrimage somewhere to be able to go and learn from other people, and to plant ourselves in a new environment where we could just get exposed to ideas. And I think that, like, it's kind of changed quite a bit, because when I was coming up through the ranks, like I would literally just fly down to go visit somebody and hang out. It was so simple. Like, it wasn't like you weren't overwhelmed. I just would be like, hey, can I come hang out? And you say sure, and I come down and we would just hang out and coach and whatever, and I would go home and have all kinds of great ideas. It's a little more complicated now, I think, but I think the what I would say is, the best times are those times, and you will make connections. You will get exposed to different ideas, and that is how you're going to really not only have connections, but also broaden your like, you become very seasoned in what your profession is like. And so for strength and conditioning coaches who are out there, I think it's an investment in yourself, to be able to, like, COVID really killed things with, like everything kind of just moved online. A lot of conferences and stuff kind of died out. I feel like it's coming back now, but it's like, people are still like, can you just send me the video and I'll just watch it on my own time. I'll podcast it, which is great. Hey, great medium, right? Like, this is how a lot of us get that base knowledge now, is through podcasting. I listen to podcasts daily, but the next step of being able to go out and see the people and meet them and make that connection, and to, like, percolate at night and to be talking to your friend about, like, what you learned and what you want to do and how it could be different. That synthesization of knowledge is where wisdom comes from. So don't forget that, like, taking in knowledge, you need to synthesize it. And there's no better way to synthesize it than to be on the road with your best friend, where you're shadowing somebody that you really respect, and you come out at the end of the day and you've got all this stuff in your head, and you go for a drink, and you have some dinner, and you're like, man, my head's about to explode. What did you think about today? And you're like, oh, it was insane. You know what I took away was this. And it was like, geez, I actually was thinking about that too. And that's actually, I would love your listeners to remember that that's where the wisdom comes in. And you got to go through that step. It's like, digestion is not just simply like chewing a Tic Tac where you eat it and it's like, oh, that tasted good. Sometimes knowledge feels like eating Tic Tacs. It's like, there's so much out there. I just listened to a podcast, I have knowledge. But it's almost like you need to think about it like, yes, sometimes that's good, but occasionally you got to sit down and eat that tough piece of steak where you're just going to gnaw and chew on it, and you're going to digest this nutritious meal, but it took you forever to eat, but it was like super nutritious at the end, and you need that. And so you need to take the time to eat the meal of knowledge with your friends to generate it and turn it into wisdom that fuels your paradigm. So yeah, you gotta capitalize on that. Like that's the best times of my career was doing that. So
Same for me. I went and visited
yeah,
TCU and visited LSU. Like I've always done site visits where it's not only just going to,
yeah,
yeah, conferences are cool, but it's like I want the behind the scenes messy stuff. Like
me too.
let
Yeah,
me sleep on your floor, let me sleep on your couch. Like, okay, you got an extra bedroom, I'll stay. Like, listen,
yeah,
I'll slide you money for staying at your house. Like, it's not like I'd rather
yeah.
spend more time with you than at a hotel. You know what I mean? So I couldn't agree
100%.
with you more. I really couldn't, because there is value in that. Yes, let's go and learn a bunch on our own, and then let's find time to, come together and talk about things like you said, and percolate on it.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic place to wrap this up. I greatly appreciate your time, Matt. I've learned a ton. I got a bunch of notes right here written down. So thank you very much, brother.
That was a great combo. Yeah, appreciate it, and thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thanks for watching that video. If you enjoyed it, click right here for videos just like that, and make sure you click here to subscribe to our channel. Have a great rest of your day.